Greetings.
Hello.
Greet.
My greeting.
Well met.
I greet you.
Greetings, traveler.
Greetings, friend.
The pleasure is mine.
Hello and welcome to episode 191 of Concede, a Hearthstone podcast dedicated to making the competitive side of the game more accessible to you. Joining from Gadgetzan, New York, it's me, Ridiculous Hat. From Karazhan, California, we have Botticus.
Hello.
And a special guest joining us this week from Northrend, Massachusetts, home of the priest, it's WickedGood.
Hey, hi. It's been a long-time listener, first time, well, I guess second time caller.
You've
Been
called
a while,
bunch.
though. I've
Yes.
called a lot. I usually sit in the balcony like Statler and Waldorf during the live recording, so.
Those are my favorite
You know, it's-
Muppets, I'll have you know. They're the best Muppets.
You know, hey, I'm very partial to them because they're the grumpy old guys who sit in the back and heckle. That's my kind of people,
That's
you know.
It's a good kind of person. Kinda, not really. And Appa is taking some personal time this week. He's got some stuff going on, so he'll be back next week. And we have you, the listener. You're here, like you are every week. We appreciate you so much. If you'd like to find out more about how you can support us, receive rewards in return, head to patreon.com/coinconcede. You can also support us by leaving an iTunes review. And if you were listening live, you are listening here. This is Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern. You might have noticed this is 2 weeks in a row for us. We are likely going to move this show to this time permanently going forward. Release should still be Friday or Saturday, but for those of you that like the live recordings, now is the time that we're planning on moving to, which is a little bit easier for all parties. So, letting you all know. And, hey, we have a special guest. So, Botticus, why don't you take it away and ask him what he's doing here?
Hey, Steve.
Hi,
How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I am excited to be here. This is the highlight of my week.
Oh, well, it's also the highlight of our week. I'm really excited to get to talk to you again. It's been a while
Yeah.
since we've had you on. So, I know we've gotten a few new listeners, hopefully, at least. So, for those of them who maybe aren't as familiar with you, why don't you do a kind of a brief introduction and kind of where you are in the Hearthstone community?
Yeah, so I'm Steve. I go by WickedGood. I do a podcast called Off Curve from my car, which is usually like 35 to 40 minutes of whatever ends up going in through my head. It's usually kind of stream of consciousness. I just kind of start talking and I stop talking when I pull into my driveway. And you may, if you're not a listener of that show, you may have seen my graphs and charts from the specialist meta because I've started working with team. I'm a data architect by day. That's my day job. And a couple months ago, I was able to figure out how to get the data out of the Battlefy API. And so I started pulling a whole bunch of data out of the Battlefy tournament pages for the specialist qualifiers. And now I've got, I don't even know how many games we're recording right now, but I've got since rotation, which is like, that was like 120, I think, that for Las Vegas, and then we just did like 90. No, we just did finish 120 for Seoul. So I've got about 240 qualifiers with 8 rounds apiece times however many games of data in that dashboard showing win rates and frequency and matchup statistics and all kinds of nerdy good stuff about what specialist decks are crashing into each other. So that's been a lot of what I've been doing, along with, you know, streaming and all the normal Hearthstone stuff that everybody.
So, why? Why get
I
all,
ask myself
why get
that
all this
all the
data? Because I mean, I think that I think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people that this data is all useful, and I definitely know we all appreciate that you're going through all this work, but. And I see Hat shaking his head vigorously, but kind of why did you decide to this data for everybody?
You know, I'm a developer by trade, and I don't have to do a whole lot of development now. architect, which means it's effectively a more technical management position, really. So I don't actually get to code. They don't let me code very much. Like, things break generally when I try to code. My developers do that stuff, right? So I wanted a side project to be able to kind of keep my skills sharp and try to do some different things. And this just kind of presented itself as an opportunity. It was like kind of an interesting data set, and a lot of people who work in like this kind of field, like, we're all data nerds. Like, I started out in iTunes, may it rest in peace, when they came out with smart playlists, and I like categorized my entire like 15,000 track music library into smart playlists that were organized by like when I got them and how long I'd rated them and all kinds of weird stuff. So like, I just kind of can't not, like, I just keep tinkering with the thing. Like, I'm not even wanting to spend that much time with it, and I just kind of every night I'm like, oh, I should do this, and that would make it a little bit easier, or I should get this, and that's another data point that I can bring in, and I bet I could do a cool visualization of that. So it's like, I can't. It's like anything else, right? It's like it's kind of like try harding in Hearthstone. It's hard to turn it off when you come home, and I kind of needed an outlet for that, and it helps that, you know, in the kind of work that I do, everything is very proprietary. It's all like internal business data. So I can't really show it to anybody. Like, I do all this cool stuff and I can't really show it to anybody. So this is something that it's like, here, this is the cool stuff that I can do. Go take a look and enjoy it, you know.
Are you surprised with the data you've collected? Has anything jumped out to you as like something you've learned by getting all of this together, that you weren't like expecting when you kind of started out on this project?
I think I was surprised by like how how consolidated the meta gets in specialists really quickly. I'm not really so surprised because it makes sense when you think about it, but like, I don't think there's been a tournament that I've tracked where there weren't like two or three decks that were both like 25 to 40% of the meta. And I mean, it makes sense if you're going into like a 15-hour grind fest of a Masters qualifier. Like, you're not going to go take some stupid deck. Like,
Wow.
I'm painting Priest main right now. Like, you're not going to take like Resurrect Priest most of the time. People do like try to jam, you know, 12 rounds with it. You're going to take something that you know is going to work, right? And so a lot of people kind of gravitate towards are, and that's like 75 to 80% meta. I knew that it was going to do that, but I never really thought that it would be like that. And I thought there would be a little bit more fluctuation in the meta, and there really isn't. It was Rogue from the beginning of Soul. Basically, the next day, it took like 2 or 3 days, and then it was mid-range Hunter. Pretty much from then until now. We haven't gotten any data since the buffs because we haven't had any Masters qualifiers since the buff patch came down. This is the week that they implemented the changes where they're going to qualify the top 2 in every tournament instead of the top 1. So we haven't had anything since since Sunday night. And the first one should be starting in about an hour, so I'll be able to get some data probably tomorrow morning about what people were bringing to those first couple of qualifiers. So I'm going to be really interested to see what that meta looks like, because there's been a lot of experimentation. It's kind of not clear what the best way is to attack this meta, and I'm wondering if this is going to be one exception where it's like all over the place, or if there's already kind of a like one deck to rule them all.
Yeah, this is all great information. It seems also like just a ton like there's just so much to parse through. Have you worked with anybody else to kind of make sure that all the data you're getting is the type of data that you want to be getting?
Yeah, I mean, Iku Pasca is the one who leads the specialist meta report. He's been awesome, by the way. He kind of came into my Discord like right before I think it was like right before rotation, and we were just started talking about it, and then I found that code like around the same time, like, okay, and I just started coding. And he's been great in terms of both, like, he's combing through all the lists manually anyway, because he's going and posting all of the winners, and I'm only refreshing the thing twice a day manually. So he's going out and seeing, and he's like, okay, well, there's this weird deck, and I don't know what this is. I don't think it's what you have it classified as. We should probably take a look at it. And we've been doing a lot of good back and forth, and he's been really great in terms of like, this stat would be really useful. And then it's like, because I haven't played any specialist. Like, I'm analyzing all the data, but I haven't actually played in it, so I don't have any firsthand knowledge. But that's no different than like what I do at work, where I don't like sell anything, right? Like, I don't sell anything. I don't buy anything. I don't, do GL or whatever. Like, I just run the data to do it. So I'm used to that position. So he's been really good in finding me use cases and like, spot checking the data and saying, okay, this deck looks wrong. We should probably fix it. We need to change the deck classifications. That's probably what I'm going to be doing a lot of this weekend, is kind of tweaking the deck classifications and trying to figure out like how all these things fit together and how to best classify them. Like, we've gone back and forth on Rogue like 3 or 4 times. Like, do we all out by all these different archetypes, or shove them all in the tempo Rogue until we figure out what's going on? And it's kind of a fluid thing, but it's fun.
It's nice to have like a client simulator of
Yeah.
a person that represents your end users, even if they're not your end users. And this is very complicated. I mean, even last season, most of the major sites, I think, both HS Replay and Vicious Syndicate, it was just Tempo Rogue, and you
Yeah.
were able to break it out in basically, are you playing Fence and Vendetta, or are you playing South Sea Deckhand? And that
Yeah.
was a really big question about how the deck played out. Were you going for more value? Were you going for more face? By the end of the season, it was much easier because everyone was just going face. But
Right.
and that kind of question is very important, because if you look at what you have right now for just week 4, to speak to your earlier point about how Specialist tends to eliminate diversity, if you add together Mid-Range Hunter, Tempo Rogue, and Bomb Warrior, just those 3 decks, that is 65% of all entries for all tournaments for week 4. 3 decks, 2/3 of the meta. If you were able to break Tempo Rogue out into, are you burgling, or are you attacking, or are you going all in Spirit of the Shark, or whatever, what are you doing in your Rogue deck, that would be, it would help guide behavior a little bit more than just saying they're a bunch of rogues. Right?
And it depends, right? Like, it depends on how differently they play. Like, where we had it broken out that way, and then I was looking at the matchup statistics, I'm like, this isn't actually useful, because you're seeing 3 or 4 decks that are kind of all the same anyway, and they all have all kind of the same matchup spreads. And then it's like, well, is this useful knowing that it's against these kind of couple different decks that all kind of do the same thing anyway? They're just kind of taking slightly different card choices to get there. So that's when we decided to just simplify it. And then there was a good conversation with Old Guardian, who's also, very big into the space, and he does a lot of this stuff by hand too. And so he's kind of a good check occasionally, because everyone who kind of does this kind of data analysis, we all kind of talk to each other anyway. And so every so often we'll have a conversation about, well, how are you classifying this? How am I classifying this? This is all like, I don't have any fancy machine learning. It's like really just a really, really complicated if then statement that I'm doing. Like, if it's this class and if it has this card or this card, okay, it doesn't have that, let me check for this. And it's just like kind of, if it has this and not that, but it's all just really a very complicated if statement, because I'm not doing, like, you can do things like clustering and classification and all kinds of statistical stuff, and I don't have the time or the energy for that. So I'm just kind of keeping it simple, because it's something I can just look at and I can explain to somebody else really easily too.
Yeah, it helps that it's Specialist, where everything is open list and people are naturally not playing super diverse decks anyways. Your other category, where things are not being caught and dumped, we're talking single digits here, as opposed to when you have ladder games where you have hundreds of thousands of people every single day submitting games, and misclassifying will cost you really valuable data, as we'll talk about later in the show. Spoilers. The data points are much more homogenous, and that really makes the job easier.
Yeah, and they're it's also a smaller data set, so it's easier to just like manually scan it by hand and just say, okay, is this right or not? Like, I can go in and look and say, okay, well, here are the lists. Click through the list. Okay, this is not what I think it is. Let's change it. Like, we go through the other by hand, like and just make sure that there's nothing that's getting like missorted into there, or like something that we didn't consider, or like I made an assumption it's not right anymore, we need to change it. But yeah, it's a lot easier than like what Vicious Syndicate or HS Replay are doing with ladder data, for sure.
Well, I had another question, and it definitely wasn't for any sort of selfish purposes. Coin Concede, listener, not league, that I may or may not have top aided and need a deck to play. I was going to ask you what to play, but you said you haven't. I guess you haven't done a ton of specialist yourself. I guess I
No.
just need to go and read your meta report and figure out what's good.
Yeah, and we don't have any post buff data yet. So I could tell you that mid range hunter is pretty much the way to go. It was before. I don't know if it still is. Secret Hunter was kind of a sleeper deck that was starting to pick up some steam. I wouldn't play mage. I'll tell you that much. I wouldn't do that. But I mean, a lot of it is just like the reason that mid range hunter, bomb warrior, tempo rogue are tier 1 is because they win a lot, and it's not even like they're like Cyclone Mage is kind of the exception where it gets brought a lot and not a lot of people win with it. But the Rage Hunter, those 3 decks, those top tier 3 decks or tier 1 decks, they get played a lot because they win a lot. And so they get more because they win more. Like, and you'll see people posting what was won with. Like the winners get posted. I mean, Kupaska does that several times a day. And then you see more of that list. And so the more something wins, usually the more it gets brought. And then people try to counter it and then it dips a little bit. And there's kind of some ebbs and flows, but one of those top 3 decks were pretty much the way to go. I would imagine, Bomb Warrior may take a little bit of a hit if Mech Paladin becomes a thing. That's going to be really what I'm going to be looking for is like how much do like Mech Hunter and Mech Paladin affect how much Bomb Warrior gets brought and how well Bomb Warrior does.
And Mech Rogue. Don't forget about Mech Rogue.
To forget something, you have to remember it. Yeah. Like it has to have happened.
I'm talking about
it has
actual
2
decks.
mechs in it. Well, 3 mechs in it.
There's Pogo Hopper, Blight Nozzle Crawler, and Ziliax.
Oh no, just 2
Blight
Pogo
Nozzle
Hoppers.
Crawler, wow.
two Pogo Hoppers and a Ziliax.
I would not
but it
call
actually
that
has a
an
lot
necro.
more because you shuffle a bunch of bunnies into your deck.
And then you die because you get hit in the face. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wondering how Hunting's Party's doing in these mid-range hunter decks.
I've seen it in some secondary lists. I don't understand it, but
do you understand it more or less than Bloodfin Raptor?
I understand it more than Bloodfin Raptor. That I do understand more, but I mean, it's I saw some fairy dragons making it into those lists too, and that makes a little bit more sense, even though it's not a beast. At least it like can't be targeted by.
Do they board out Master's Call? Or do you just
no.
sometimes just draw a card?
Just draw one? It's just I'd have to look at the list. I remember just seeing it in like something that was really like one of the last qualifiers.
I mean, I like that idea, but everywhere where you want Fairy Dragon, you'd want 3 mana, draw 3 cards way more. And I don't know. I really enjoyed Kutapaska actually interviewed, like, Ask Green Sheep, what's going on with your deck, and the answer was Bloodfin Raptor because it pressures. Does it? Does it? Is that what that card does?
Haven't you seen Jurassic Park? I mean, come on.
They were under pretty high pressure.
I'm surprised River Croclist wouldn't be better. I'm just kind of
if
like
I'm
it obviously
attacking.
does one. It does 1 less damage, but it survives all. If you're boarding it in against mage, aren't like you're able to attack more with the Croclist because it takes a lot longer for them to kill it because it doesn't die to Ray of Frost. And
if they Ray of Frost your Bloodfin Raptor, you are thrilled. That is
that's not a problem.
You win that every time. Like the dream scenario with Bloodfin Raptor is that you play it on 2 and they ping it twice and just haven't done anything with their first 2 turns, and you're like, I got two mana, skip 2 turns 2 and 3, deal 3 damage. That's a Frostbolt.
That's a 2 mana fireball if you get to hit with that twice. Like, come on.
Yeah.
That's just value.
Pressure.
Well, I'm just thinking like obviously if they're Ray of Frosting it and doing nothing else, you're happy. But if you're playing a Bloodfin Raptor and they go Sorcerer's Apprentice, double Ray of Frost, and then play a Cyclone, then you're way worse off. Whereas at least the Croclist kind of gets in there.
That Frozen 2 one against the turn 3 nut draw is really gonna get you there, Botticus. That's the thing you were missing.
I played a deck that ran Sword of Justice unironically on ladder this week, so I don't know anything about Hearthstone clearly. So
you know that Baku's not a format, right?
No, but
you know it is.
You have a lot of mechs.
And Paragon of Light.
Oh.
Yeah.
It
gets
Skater Boy.
Life Steal.
Lifesteal. It's a 3 mana 2/5.
Drop. Yeah, and it gets if it has 4 attack, it gets Lifesteal,
3
and taunt,
attack.
Yeah.
3
Oh,
attack.
3 attack, yeah,
Yeah,
'cause
it's
it's
a
two.
2. It's a 2
Yeah.
5, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So
it
it becomes a
3/6
3/6 lifesteal taunt
with
for
lifesteal
3
taunt.
mana. It's pretty juicy. It's light and
Yeah.
justice. Great combo.
I think it procs on the magnetic minions too, if I remember. I played.
Well, it's
like,
not a
2 games
mech,
with it, and then I
so
went
you
on
can't
to-
really.
It's
No,
not
no,
a
no, no.
mech.
The sword. I mean,
Oh yes, the
Oh, yeah.
sword.
I think the sword procs on the magnetic minions as you play them. I don't remember for sure.
That doesn't sound like it would work, but I don't know. Who knows?
I don't know. I think I might have been delirious by the time I got to that list too. So that's
And if
I
you
was already playing
weren't,
Sword of Justice. Nothing else made sense. I was hallucinating.
if you weren't delirious before, after you cast Vargoth and then Christology on turn 5, then you were delirious from all this
no.
value.
See, that's not the play. The play is that you play a Prismatic Lens, you hit Kangor's Endless Army, and then you play Vargoth and Kangor's Endless Army, and then you just summon a whole bunch of mechs, and then your opponent cries. I did have one game where I had an opponent who and had 2 hyenas that were both above 10 attack, and they emoted well played, and then I played a Kangor's Endless Army, rushed down both the hyenas, and went on to win the game. I made sure to emote a couple times between that and the end of the game, just to make sure they knew who was on top. But it's a fun deck.
Okay, so I am calling this the life and ladder section now. That was a segue we didn't even know happened because tell me more. Tell me more about this deck. I want to know more things because I've also played it, but I want to hear you talk about it because of what you did to that person.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically my kind of deck, right? Where I'm not looking to win, I'm looking to send a message. And so this is it was Xerios who has this list with the Sword of Justice. And you're running a whole bunch of the magnetic mechs. You run all the 1-drops, you run Glowtron and Skaterbot, and you run Bronze Gatekeepers, and obviously you run War Gears and Ziliax and whatever, and you have a bunch of
Galvanizer, I
cards.
assume.
What's up?
Galvanizer, I assume.
Yeah. You have Galvanizer as well, and so now you can play Christology on 1. You get 2 minions. One of them is probably a Galvanizer, and then you have Call to Adventure, which gives +2/+2 and draws another minion out of your deck, so that's making it bigger. And it turns out when you're magnetizing minions onto other minions and they're all buffed, they get pretty big pretty fast. I've had like a 20 health taunt on like turn 4, and you just kind of hit your opponent with those, and you can get the attack pretty big too. And then you have the Skater bots there with Rush, and especially when they're buffed with a Call to Adventure or they're buffed with a Glowstone Technician, which is also in the list. Then that's getting like +3/+3 in Rush to one of these other magnetic minions, and then you take down their minions, and then you also have Kangor's Endless Army, so you have these big minions that die, and then you resurrect them and clear the board all over again, and then your opponent is sad. Ideally, it can snowball. I mean, if your opponent is playing Earthshock, that's not a good time, and that seems to be a thing. But if they're not doing that, you can really get off to a big start, and by like turn 5, turn 6, you're just making these behemoths that if they don't have a silence or they don't have a polymorph effect, it's just game over. There's no way for them to deal with it.
Yeah, I have also been playing a bit of this deck alongside a whole bunch of, well, really anything I can find. I have filled my deck slots twice because I have a problem. And
So do I.
and I will say that I have been surprised by Paragon of Light, but also just this deck in general. And Glowstone Technician, I think, is really, really powerful. A friend of mine and I have been working together on a deck that I'll talk about in a little bit called, I'm going to lovingly call it Menagerie Paladin, because it is Beast Dragon and sometimes Murloc Paladin. And yeah, I'll explain.
Is it running the Hench Clan Hogsteed? Is that why it's sometimes Murloc?
No, it's.
Oh, okay.
We're going way deeper than that. Way deeper than that.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh, good.
So it is Nightmare Amalgam and Friends deck. So we'll talk about it. But Glowstone Tech in a lot of decks is pre-casting Savage Roar or double Blessing of the Ancients. And in a lot of ways, you can compare it almost to a Fungal Mancer that just takes a little longer.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly powerful when you have really high minion density. This is a deck building challenge, but one that I think is not inherently unhealthy. Because it's saying take out all the spells from your deck except for Crystology and probably some volume of Prismatic Lens and maybe Kangaroo's Endless Army. We're not even playing. And Call to Adventure, yeah. Take out spells except for ones that get you minions, and then get a bunch of minions, and then buff them all. So I've really enjoyed Xerios' deck. I think it's really good and a lot of fun. And another deck that I've been trying out, my friend Nicotine Jones, who I've known for probably about 20 years now, and we were on a team together building decks in Magic the Gathering. He was building them, and I was playing them a lot. And he's got a very sharp mind for this sort of thing. And so we're playing... It's an Untamed Beastmaster deck. Mostly.
Okay, you have my attention.
Untamed Beastmaster. Because if Crystology only gets Stone Tusk Boar and Vicious Scalehide, then Untamed Beastmaster is very good. And then those cards also really like getting an extra +2/+2 in your hand, so you have this card called Glowstone Technician. And then in addition to that, you play Murloc Tasty Fin, because you can draw either 2 Amalgams or 2 Bluegill Warriors, which also really like getting buffed in your hand. And in addition to that, we also play Twilight Drake and Scaleworm and Fire Tree Witch Doctor, because Scaleworm's really good. And Amalgam enables all this stuff. And I know it sounds like a pile, but basically, from turns about 2 through 5, you just play things that are slightly better than they sound, and have like just a bunch of 3/4s and 4/4s. There's Bronze Herald in there too, by the way.
Oh, well, why not? I mean, at that point,
because you just put more minions in your hand, and then they're 4-mana 6/6s. So there was a game earlier today where I killed someone on turn 6 because I Glowstone Teched, and then Boar, Bluegill, Scalehide to clear a taunt. You're dead now. You're just not playing anymore. The Warrior matchup's not good. Warrior's not good. You don't want to play against Warrior because your threats are just slow enough that they can kill him, and just small enough that they can kill him, so they kill him. And I think we really want Stranglethorn Tiger, if I'm being honest with you. I think we want some Stranglethorns in here.
You need Dosta in there is what you need.
That costs way too much. Our curve tops at 5, except for a single...
You also don't want to be putting a Stone Tusk Boar into play with your Undasta.
Yeah.
Look, if it's like a 20/20, you get that's value. You can get that out 1 turn earlier. You can just charge that out.
So I'm not going to respond to that, but... And the only spells in the deck, as of right now, are 2 Crystologies and a single Prismatic Lens. Because you always want the No, you always want the Prismatic Lens to get a 1. So Prismatic Lens always gets a 1.
But wouldn't the Call to Adventure get one of the 1 attack minions that would then get buffed by the Untamed Beastmaster?
Well, it gets lowest cost. So it's once your Stone Tusk Boars are out of the deck, then you get like Bluegills, Evil Cable Rat, Fire Tree Witch Doctor. Maybe there's something there, but I really like the minion density is important, and I really like so far the one Prismatic Lens guaranteeing that whatever you draw is a 1-mana minion. That's been kind of nice to have. And 4-mana Crystology is sometimes actually fair, which says a lot because it costs 1 mana.
Yeah.
So anyways, I've been playing that. It's decent. I'm not going to say it is the world beater, but I am going to say that I have enjoyed it very much. And my win rate with it is probably about 50-50, but the happiness record is 100%. And I'm looking at the stats now. I am 5-3 with it. It's fun.
That's not bad. That's respectable.
And that's between trying every single control shaman there is, and a bunch of token shamans that I don't understand how to win with, and sometimes win anyways, but usually don't. And Former Champ is actually everywhere in the ladder. For those that don't know, that's the 5-mana 1/1 that makes a 5/5. And shaman decks are playing a card that I rate as an F. Mutate.
Yeah.
Because you mutate the 5-mana 1/1. And I do not wish to say that Former Champ was not released at the time, because it's from the same set. Or no, it's from... Mutate's from Rise of Shadows. Former Champ was in Rostagon's Rumble, so I just simply did not predict that being a thing. But here we are, where Two Beers hit rank 17 Legend today with a Control Shaman deck with double Former Champ and Mutate. So...
It also runs Spirit of the Frog, right? So
you want to know something I could have predicted?
I don't think so, yes.
Mutate would have. I could have guaranteed you that Mutate would be better than Dr. Boom's scheme.
I want to point out one of those has been in a specialist winning deck. And
Hey,
one
there's
is-
time. There could be.
You
It
just
could
wait.
be one right now. It could be getting submitted
Okay.
in 15 minutes.
Then if we're saying that Mutate might end up being a playable card and that Dr. Boom Scheme and Mutate are equally ranked, then maybe
No, Dr. Boom's scheme is not a playable card.
okay.
Still refusing to
Okay.
believe it.
That's fine.
Have anything else for
seek
for
no
your
validation.
week? I seek so much validation. Anything else for your week, Hat?
Not really, other than rank 4 is very comfortable and I think it's my home now because I've been there for 2 weeks.
Well, I wish I could say that rank 4 was my home, but I went down to rank 5 today. And I want to say that it was because I was prepping for our extra special guest, WickedGood, by playing Priest. I saw Kibler playing this with Zera, and
That
it
card's
pretty. It did some stuff, but it won a couple games and then it lost a bunch of games in a row because Earthshock and Hex are really good against arms. Very good card now. That card is very powerful. But yeah, so played a bit of that, but I also tried the new APX Void Mage list that put the legendary spell in it. Wow.
Pocket Galaxy.
Yeah, and let me tell you, playing Luna's Pocket Galaxy and then next turn playing Luna and then just starting to play minions over and over again for 1 mana is very powerful. It was very good. So that deck is really sweet, but I'm really interested. I saw that Cora hit Legend today with a Freeze Mage, which is kind of a it looks like somewhat of a combination between the small spell Sorcerer's Apprentice mage deck and the very heavy minion focus version, and it's kind of a mix of the two of them, and everybody's calling it Freeze Mage because it's got Frost Nova, Doomsayer, and a lot of Ray of Frost and all that stuff. So I'm really excited to try that deck. That deck seems quite good. She posted that it's got very polarized matchups in some areas, but seems like a very cool deck, and I'm excited that Luna's Pocket Galaxy seems like kind of a playable card. Which
that
is
difference
interesting.
that difference between 5 mana and 7 mana on a card that you want to play on curve because it affects how many cards it's hitting in your deck is a pretty significant change. Just because it means that both of you can play it earlier, which means you're less likely to die if you take a whole turn to just play that card and do literally nothing, and also that you're hitting more cards with it, so you're more likely to be able to get what you want out of it. I was watching Language Hacker playing that Freeze Mage, and basically you're trying to hit like a 1 mana Antonitis and then just start chaining a whole bunch of Ray of Frost and then start fireballing your opponent in the face. Or you also run Geppetto Joybuzz to give yourself a second chance at it because you need a little bit of redundancy. And then you have Giants, and you still have Giants and Conjurer's Calling and Alexstrasza and a whole bunch of big fat minions. The problem with that deck is that when you don't draw Lunas early, like all those minions are super clunky, and like any aggro deck just like beats the crap out of you if it's not board based. Like I was playing some of the aggro overload shaman today, and that deck is something. And I think that would kind of eat the Freeze Mage for lunch because it's still running like lava bursts and lightning bolts and stuff like that, and Electro Storm Surge to be able to double up on those. And that's not a Freeze Mage isn't doing anything about that because it's to be like the old school shaman where you do whatever damage you can do with your minions and then you just burn them over the top for the rest. And Freeze Mage doesn't do well with that.
Yeah, I was looking at that the aggro shaman, and my biggest complaint without having played any games with it is just that the minion count looks super low with it. So that's the only concerning thing to me is sometimes you're just going to draw hands that are just all spells, and then
Yeah.
you don't do anything until they develop a board, and then you might have to use your spells to get rid of their stuff because you don't have enough spells to go face to kill them. So I'm interested to try it out for sure, but that was the thing I noticed is just the very low minion count.
Yeah, you do have minions that give minions though, because it runs an Underbelly Angler, it runs a couple of Murlocs, it runs the Sludge Slurpers, so you get lackeys out of them, and then you run. I had a game right before we started recording where it runs Zentimo, which is weird. At least the list that I'm playing, which I thought was weird, until my opponent conjures Calling the Giant, and then I played Zentimo Earthshot and then hit them in the face and killed them. And then I understood Zentimo. Like, that makes a lot of sense. You also run, like, Earth and Might in there, so I had one turn where I had Zentimo on board and I had 2 mana left over. Like, okay, I'm just going to buff my whole board for 2. I'm playing Token Druid now. And, like, a lot of the lines are really weird, but they just kind of work together in a weird way. And also, you want a lot of spells because you're generally trying to drop Spirit of the Frog on curve and then use the spells to draw other spells. So you want a lot more cheap spells in order to be able to get those out. So like you're running Zap and you're running Earth Shots and Lightning Bolts. And you don't run Mutate in the list that I'm running, but I know some of the other ones do. But that's why there's a lot more spells, because your deck gets so thin just with one turn of Spirit of the Frog that you're going to draw into the minions anyway.
How does Thunderhead feel?
Thunderhead feels awesome.
Was it a significant increase from where it was at before?
I think it was still good, but not being able to die to a militia commander is actually pretty significant. Like, there's not really anything like we learned that with Magic, right? Like, there's not an easy way to kill an early minion with 6 health. So without like a hard removal spell. So it does tend to stick around, or if not, it's taking an entire turn to deal with, which means that's fine. I'll just start developing another board and then you can deal with that. So either way, I win basically when I drop it. I'm usually developing, like, usually you can drop it with a Zap or Lightning Bolt and just clear off a board, and then they have to deal with it, and they're usually not developing, and then you can just develop again behind it, and then you just kind of keep tempo that way.
I played 2 games with the Overload Shaman list. I'm playing a slightly different one from you. I found one that someone who was top 10 legend with it, and it's very low curve, low minion count. It reminds me a lot of Flame Waker Tempo Mage.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to that in that your minion count is like 10 in the entire deck because you're a burn deck. And Spirit of the Frog is the littlest Flame Waker or Gadget Stand Auctioneer, whatever you want to call it. It's because you're intending on playing a Doomhammer, and then
that too.
Yeah, and then having Spirit of the Frog and just playing Lightning Bolt, Rockbiter Weapon, and Lava Burst in the same turn.
Yeah.
And then they're dead now. So the deck has a lot of play to it, and I did not play very many games with it. I played 2. One of them was against a Token Druid, and I was playing defensively.
That's not fun.
Well, I was playing defensively the entire game, and I beat 4 Forest because Thunderhead's a hell of a card. And when you go Thunderhead Feral Spirit, and then play 2 Underbelly Anglers, and that gets you your 3rd Angler, you're able to trade for a while. So I traded into 3, and when they played the 4th, I killed them. But I want to point out I went through, I think, in that entire game, 12 Doomhammer charges.
Yeah.
And the second Doomhammer was mostly important to generate 2 1/1s to trade with the last 2/2. So the deck has a ton of play.
It's like a Piranha Launcher. It's fantastic.
It's a little bit better than Piranha Launcher, but I felt the entire game like I was losing, and this deck can't be very good. And then they were dead, and I was like, "What happened?" I was playing an aggro deck, and I traded with Doomhammer 5 turns in a row, and now they're dead. What happened?
And it turns out Doomhammer Rockbiter is still pretty good.
It does a lot of
It's
damage.
still a good combo.
It does.
It's a good throwback.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will say, against the Weapons Project Warriors I played against today, not as good. Was worse.
Yeah.
Was a worse card. But
just don't queue into Warrior. That's easy.
Yeah. Life would be easier if that was just a button that you could press.
I feel it would be way better if that just wasn't a deck.
We lived in that world for about 30 seconds after the patch notes, right? So before they clarified what they actually meant by the.
Oh yeah, the patch notes for a second. People thought you can't queue into the same class multiple times. Like, no, just the person.
Yeah.
And I did see a very entertaining picture this week tweeted by friend Chris Plummer of 1600 Dust, who had found someone, I don't think it was his tweet originally, but had tweeted a picture of a rank 25 player against a rank 18 player, except rank 18 legend player.
Oh, that happens all the time, though.
Does it?
Like, not all the time, but there's like every season there's one of those pictures.
But when you
I don't
do
think-
improve matchmaking,
Well, we actually have a note about that in the news section, kind of.
he said, segueing like his life depended on it.
So speaking of updates and new matchmaking things that are going on, we have a new patch that went live, and we have the official post about it on the Play Hearthstone website here. It basically goes into that you can now obtain a golden snip snap by logging on between now and July 1st. So make sure you log in between now and then, because after that, the only way to get snip snap will be to craft it. And you don't want to have to spend 1600 dust on this when you could just get one for free. So make sure you pick this up while you can. Also, it goes through all the card changes that we've gone through and know about. I'm actually interested, real quick, you guys, what card have you been most impressed by that was altered by the changes? I'm going to actually say Luna, the card that I wasn't necessarily expecting to see a lot of play, even with a massive 2 mana reduction, but I was pretty surprised that it seems quite a bit better and actually like a worthy inclusion in a lot of these decks. Hat, you go first.
Okay. Well, he's pointing at me, so yeah. But
Okay.
I think that's probably. I think that Necromechanic is also way better than I thought it was going to be, because I did not realize that the 9 lives interaction was a thing. Where if you play 9 lives, that Death Rattle triggers twice. So that's like a 7 mana play where you Necromechanic and then you play 9 lives and you blow up 2 minions, or you draw 2 cards, or summon 2 mechs from your hand, whatever it happens to be. So that's probably a close second. But yeah, Luna's Pocket Galaxy has definitely enabled the most archetypes that didn't really exist before.
I have 3 answers. The real answer is Crystology, Glowstone Tech,
Oh, yeah.
shortly behind. Crystology is, I think, the most played card that was not played much before, or at least the card that
I don't
had
think it was
prompted the most
surprising
experimentation.
though, right?
Yeah.
Because that card was already seeing play, and then
Yeah.
we expected it to just obviously get way better. But yeah, I'll accept
Yeah.
that.
Yep. The answer for the first 2.5 hours of the buffs is Pogo Hopper. The real answer is actually Earthshock. That card has seen a significant improvement. And the answer I'm going to give, I got a golden Reckless Experimenter in my chest last month. So that is the most improved card for me, because that improved from 400 dust to 1600, and I am very happy with that buff.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I compare Pogo Hopper Rogue to like Kingsbane Rogue, like old Kingsbane before it was good, because it just feels like the deck that's going to tilt me because I want to play Control, and then it just doesn't let me because I played against one with Control Shaman today, and I got through the 21-21 bunny hop of Pogo Hopper, but the 23-23 and the 25-25 finally got me. But the 19 damage Hagatha scheme was enough to clear that wave, but not the next one apparently.
I think Pogo Hopper is the most important deck for the format that is completely unplayable. It reminds me way more of MSG era Jade Druid, when you probably wouldn't play Jade Druid because people were playing Patches and Pirate Warrior, and you were just gonna die. Or people were playing Miracle Rogue with Small Time Buck and Tomb Pillager and Conceal, and you were definitely gonna die. Because you think Sap's good now. Oh boy, let me tell you about what Sap on a Jade Behemoth is like. But the deck still saw a lot of play because people really hate losing to Control, and it was free wins for all the aggro players and artificially depressed the Control population.
So it's Quest Rogue after the nerf.
It's
Or
After,
Kingsbane Road, or
after
Kingsbane
the
Road.
first
Yeah,
nerf.
well, it's
yeah.
Questro
I mean, I have the
before the
exact
first
same
nerf was
reaction
that.
to Kingsbane Road. Yeah.
Well,
'Cause,
no,
like-
before the first nerf, it was too broken and it could still beat aggro, whereas Pogo probably rarely ever beats aggro.
No.
I mean, Questrogue had a
not being an
47% win rate before it was nerfed in Angoro. It was the play pattern was unhealthy, but the results were not. They were just very polarized and particular, and also made people unhappy. So I'm not saying it shouldn't have been nerfed, but I'm saying pre-nerf Questrogue and Angoro was probably not a bad comparison either. Except this is even worse than that. It's not a deck that you can play, but if someone plays against you and you're playing control, you are going to lose. So the threat of it has suppressed Bomb Warrior, and the suppression of Bomb Warrior and Control Warrior has caused a huge increase in variety overall, which is better for the game. And I think the meta is more fun because of it, even though the threat of Pogo Hopper is more of an influence than the actual representation of Pogo Hopper.
Yeah. So I think you probably can still play control outside of rank 5, outside of like a rank floor, basically, because like those people are not climbing out of the floor rank very soon, because they're just gonna, at best, they're gonna be going 50%, because they're gonna get a free win against a control deck, then they're gonna get beaten down by Lava Bursts and Doom Hammers and gigantic mechs and whatever, and so
And
they're probably
Goblin
gonna
Bomb.
get and Goblin Bombs, yeah, and they're probably not gonna get out of the floor rank. So you probably are going to be a little bit freer to be able to play control outside of the floor ranks.
Yep, so that's kind of a brief little snippet into the new meta. We also have, it was good that Hat brought up, make sure you dust your Reckless Experimenters unless you're playing the Dane Wild deck. Actually, no. Never mind, he's playing a different card. Yeah, just dust him now. You can always recraft him later if a deck comes out, but yeah, make sure you get your full Arcane Dust value. A couple reconnection improvements that we talked about, and some offline Hearthstone. Basically, it lays out what you can now do in an kind of an offline mode, which you can really just tinker with decks, which is really cool. And the thing I alluded to earlier is the matchmaking improvements, which basically reduce your chance to queue against the same opponent twice in a row significantly, as well as a match quality improvement for players in the ranks 25 through 21. So, putting the rank 25 players against their real competition, the rank 18 legend players.
And the patch notes indicate, well, they gotta learn sometime. Please note, patch notes do not actually say that.
Yeah. And then, arena rotation, new card backs, and a bunch of bug fixes actually listed out in the patch notes. So we have a link to that in the show notes if you need a little bit more information about that. Chapter 5 of the Dalaran Heist is now live. And I will say I started playing through Chapter 5, and every one of the previous chapters I had one-shot it through on my first run on normal. And this is the first one where I did not. Now, it might have been because I was playing Discard Warlock, but I'm going to choose to believe that it's because maybe Chapter 5 is a little more difficult. You actually have to go through 12 bosses instead of 9. And I'm looking forward to playing a bit more of this one. I actually don't even know what the not anomaly, but what the special, because they always have like the special twist.
Is it
on
just
each
that
of
there's
these?
12 bosses? Is that the twist? I'm thinking about it
That
now.
might
I think
be
that
it.
might be it.
I believe they're the extra 4 bosses who each have their own twist, if I recall.
Okay. So, yeah, have either of you had a chance to try it out yet, or looking to do that a little bit later?
Yeah, I did one run. I lost on the 12 because I decided that I was going to go face instead of clear the Malygos. I don't know if it's always who's the boss. Spoiler, sorry. But he has a hero power where he summons a 2/3 minion for 3 mana that all the spells after he plays them, and I chose not to clear the Malygos, and they traded their Ronin and had 2 of those on board. And all of a sudden, I went from 130 life down to 0 because they hit me with, or maybe I was like that were all 9 damage because he played 3 of them and then all of his minions copied them, and I was very, very sad. So yeah, it's a little bit more difficult than the last wings, but it was fun. I liked it. I liked what they've been doing with some of the bosses were pretty interesting.
Yeah, overall, I've really enjoyed Dalaran Heist.
Yeah.
Like, I love the delayed release of everything, where every week you kind of just get that time. Oh, hey, I could play some Dalaran Heist, and I do it on normal, I do it on heroic, and it was a good experience. Definitely, for me, it was worth the $20 investment. So if you
Yeah.
haven't gotten your Dalaran Heist chapters, you got a-okay from me to try it out. I think it's worth it.
And you get a golden pack if you finish this wing, I believe. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something I do. Let's see. The next news item we have on here is about Mulligan guides for well, specifically referred to Rafaam, and this was an article posted by HS Replay about a little bit of incorrect information they were giving out based on some of their win rates. And I was actually going to throw this over to WickedGood because you've been doing so much data analysis and really know kind of at least this subject in somewhat. I was hoping you could kind of enlighten to us a little bit more, kind of what happened, what this article was about.
Yeah, so this started with a Reddit post this weekend where someone was saying that they were playing Zoo and the win rates and the decks weren't being tracked the way that they were expecting to, and they had a lot of good analysis and a lot of good data to kind of. So it turned out that the decks that were running Rafaam, like their win rates were played fairly significantly. And of course, Sottle after HCT was immediately tweeted like vindicated or something like that afterwards. But basically, what was happening is that they have an initial deck list that they pull from the tracker, I believe, but they also do like a second check to make sure that the deck that you're playing matches up against the deck that you say that you're playing before they track it against that deck for like the decks page. So what happened is that when people were playing Archthief Rafaam, the cards in your deck are no longer the cards that started in your deck, and normally they can track for this. Like, if what they were saying is that basically there's like a created by flag, for lack of a better term, that tells them that this was something that was a card originally and then it changed. And for most cards that like transform in your hand, that's something that they can track for, but they weren't tracking it for cards that were in your deck that had transformed. Like, if you play a card that you drew after you play Rafaam, it says created by Archvillain Rafaam underneath it, but they weren't catching that. So what was happening is that you would play Rafaam, your deck would change, and all of a sudden none of the cards that were in your deck matched the list that you said you were playing. So they had a check to not associate that game with that list. So basically, the games where you didn't have to play Rafaam, you probably won a lot of those games, because if you're playing Rafaam, you're in desperation mode. So the games where you're not playing Rafaam, like the drawn win rate was probably off the charts, because those were all games where you drew Rafaam but didn't actually play him, which means that your drawn win rate would probably be pretty good, because if you drew Rafaam and didn't have to play him, and then you probably won anyway. And the games where you did play Rafaam just kind of dropped off the map. So they fixed that, and this kind of thing happens, right? Like, I mean, I talked about how much work goes into just checking like the list for like the specialist meta, and that's like I can fit that data in a CSV file on my laptop. Like, this is millions or billions of rows of data from all these individual logs, and there's just like things you're just not going to find, and you can't just like regression test. Regression testing is basically when you run your code against like a known set of tests just to make sure that nothing broke. Like you can't do that against every new data set that comes in every day. You'd never get anything else done. So I understand them having a bug and fixing it. I was really impressed with them writing this really detailed explanation of what happened, because that's something they didn't really have to do. Like they could have just fixed it and said, okay, it's fixed, and we've cleaned up the data and it's done. But them actually explaining both how they're tracking all the decks and then why this bug happened, it was actually really well written from that perspective. And I I still have problems with a lot of the statistics that they show on the Mulligan pages, and we can talk about that later in some more detail. But this, in terms of just making sure that they're getting the data right that they're analyzing, was really a good step in the right direction, because we haven't gotten this kind of transparency from HS Replay a lot in the past, and something like this is really good for building confidence in the platform, because it's really a black box. Like you don't know what's happening in there, and them taking the time to actually explain like what they're doing and why this broke it, and also the other cards that broke it but were never really an issue, like Elite Starseeker or Renounced Darkness, because like Elite Starseeker you wouldn't play till the end of the game, it probably wouldn't affect it anyway. Like Renounced Darkness, like yeah, nobody's playing Renounced Darkness except for Disguised Toast, so that's not going to show up on the Dex page. So this was it was a kerfuffle. It got fixed, and they really handled it in a pretty positive way from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is really a cool amount of transparency coming out from HS Replay, and I think just kind of good going forward is just that people can think about these things a little bit more. It just helps future processes when determining, because I'm sure there's going to be another card that's going to come out
Yeah.
eventually that now they know they need to make sure that it's functioning correctly with their data systems. So
Yeah, and bugs happen, right? Like these are really complex code bases. It's really hard to do this kind of stuff. These things are going to happen. It's how you handle it that matters in terms of how much you trust the system like that. It's because the bugs are going to happen, and you can't like hold that against them, because if they could predict every possible interaction, they'd probably be doing something a lot more lucrative than analyzing Hearthstone decks. Like they'd be like scamming the stock market or something.
And it's important to note the only reason this really came to light was a Reddit user who posted about it 2 months after the set came out with some pretty good reasoning, and HS Replay pretty much immediately looked into it, identified it, and fixed it.
Yeah.
In retrospect, it's clear. At the time, it just was what it was, and it was interesting when you would sort decks by win rate in Standard. The top 15 were all Zoo Warlock, and they were all doing really, really great, and they all had Rafaam in it. But we all just shrugged and said the standard things, maybe low sample size, we don't know what spot in the ladder those are on, blah, blah, blah. Because data is, in and of itself, in need of interpretation.
Yeah. And there's also a tendency to fit an explanation to the data and try to use the data to come up with an explanation for it. And sometimes there's not an explanation there. Sometimes if it doesn't make sense to you, it really does make sense to question it and not just kind of take it on face value. Because I think that's kind of what happened, especially like, and I'm not going to blame the casters from HCT. Like they were doing what they should be doing, but there was a lot of talk during HCT about like the win rate of Rafaam and Zoo, and Sada was like, no, it's bad. And everyone else like, but the data. And it turns out Sada was right. So it is important to make sure that the data is, aligning with your understanding. And if you don't have that kind of knowledge, then, reaching out to players who do have that kind of knowledge, and make sure you're not just kind of taking it because the data is there that you're going to fit a narrative to it, because that's how things, go awry.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I did not mention the argument in favor of Rafaam was not that it was good, it was that it made your bad matchups 30% instead of 10%, which is not a spot you want to be, and the Conquest tournament involved a ban anyway, so it didn't really fit with the narrative that if you were not banning Worry, you should probably not bring Zoo instead of put Rafaam in your deck. But the argument against it was, it is the only card that matters in a matchup where you are incredibly unfavored. And it doesn't matter a ton, but it matters more than any other card by an order of magnitude. And that's still true. But if you're trying to be Warrior, you just don't play Zoo.
Yeah.
So now it's really just a question of how the deck is displayed on HS Replay, and it is in a better spot now because it's no longer reporting an abnormally high win rate because any game where you play Rafaam no longer gets thrown out, and you usually play Rafaam if you're losing because Zoo doesn't want to get to turn 7. They just want to kill you. So I am glad that they clarified it and went into detail, and I think they did a good job.
Yeah, and speaking of issues, our last news item is about patch 14.4 and some of the known issues, mostly regarding the Dalaran heist progression display. And this was posted by friend of the show, Shi Zhihong, or yeah, and yeah, just kind of. I actually noticed this today. I queued up my Dalaran heist, and the first boss that I faced, it displayed a boss, and then when I went into the game, a completely different boss showed up. And
Surprise!
yeah, so yeah, so ended up playing against the other boss, and then also it looks like sometimes if you're playing in chapters 2 through 5, they'll show the crowns of for the heroes that have been beaten in chapter 1 instead of the actual progress for chapters 2 through 5, and this is only a visual issue. Does not The progress is still tracked appropriately, and also the hero power and deck selection check marks will show the chapter 1 versions instead of the correct chapter 2 through 5 versions, and also just a visual issue. And the coolest thing about this article is it actually got me a link that show to a comprehensive list of all of the known issues, as well as I believe a place to be able to report other bugs. So I can report the bug I found out last week regarding Shadow Step and Magic Carpet, which apparently was kind of a known issue, but not addressed specifically like that. It was addressed in that minions created by Sonya Shadow Dancer are not granted rush by Magic Carpet. So yeah, another little interaction that I will probably be reporting after the show. Was there anything interesting you guys saw on in this little Reddit article that you wanted to bring up, or should we get right into the tournament section? Let's just get into the tournament section.
It's the grand tournament!
Yes, let's do that, because we have a whole bunch of statistics that don't really matter. So, last week, there were a bunch of tournaments. Week 3 of Grandmasters, more qualifiers, of course. The Mech-vitational, which was a super fun tournament to watch that has no bearing whatsoever on anything we're going to do in the ladder, because it was a sealed tournament. People got a bunch of packs, they made some stuff out of what they had to play with one of the buff cards, or didn't have to play, but were strongly encouraged to play and were given all the buff cards to play with. And WCG, which I didn't know was still happening, but there were the WCG America's final qualifier was this week. Terrence M. and Tempo from Chile qualified for the grand final in China later this year. So, congrats to them. I actually found some VODs on YouTube, but I don't remember seeing any advertisement for the stream at all. So, there's some VODs out there. It was, again, pre-buff and post-nerf. So, kind of that weird 1 week meta that we had. And the same thing for the Masters qualifiers. It was that 1 week meta where everything was post-nerf and pre-buff, but Tempo Rogue still very good. And there were various builds of it. A lot of the week started out with Shark Rogue, and then we landed on, well, Raiding Party's still good. Believe it or not. Osaka won with Raiding Party. Muzzy did very well last week with Raiding Party Rogue and Grandmasters. And I played some of the deck. Going Face is great. Big fan. Fairy Dragon's still good. Deck is still definitely, or at least it was legit. Now, I don't know. We don't know anything. Because all these are from pre-buff, and the buffs have been almost like a new expansion. So, it's really hard to figure out what's good right now, but last week, Grandmasters, Temper Rogue, and Bomb Warrior, and Holy Wrath Paladin actually performed pretty well. Bomb Hunter and Token Druid both had 0 wins, and Cyclone Mage won 31% of its games, wasn't played very much, didn't win very much. Mid Hunter actually kind of surprisingly underperformed with only a 40% win rate, but I think everybody was basically planning for it. For week 4, scene is much more complex. Well, kinda. Because there are 15 rogues and 15 warriors. So, they're in different regions. You'll see different things in different regions, but these are still the most popular classes for specialists. These are safe lineups for week 1 post-buff. Very, very safe. There are 15 rogues, 15 warriors, 9 mages, 5 hunters, 3 druids, a single paladin. And paladin's mech paladin is not timeout paladin. And the rogue, mostly tempo, we have 3 brave pogo hoppers, including bunny hopper and viper, who almost always play the same thing. And mage is still cyclone, various versions of that, but that is still the main deck that we're seeing. As far as special,
how all in are they on the pogo hopper package? Did they just add a couple pogo hoppers and some things that interact well, or are they like the full cape?
Yeah.
I am looking right now. Let's see here. Week 1, Europe. Bunny Hopper is playing. If this will load.
Sorry,
Oh,
I didn't
they're
mean to
in.
hold up the show. I'm just interested.
Oh, they're in. Let me tell you. No SI7 agents.
Okay.
Double Witchwood Piper. Togwaggle Scheme. Double Lab Recruiter. Double Novice Engineer. Snip Snap. Double
Spirit of the
Fan of
Shark.
Knives. No Spirit of the Shark.
Really?
No Vanish.
Interesting.
And double
The
Acidic
Vanish makes
Swamp
no sense.
Ooze.
That I'm interested in because I feel like when a lot of your draw/value is buffed by Spirit of the Shark, it seems like it makes sense. But I guess you're worried about having kind of this 4-mana card that is not. It
Yeah.
doesn't really affect the board in a meaningful sense.
Yeah, the value you're
Right.
generating, the deck already generates enough value, so it doesn't need more value in hand. And a lot of what it was doing was really pushing the lackeys. And you don't want to fill your board up. There's a game we'll talk about where the 4 lackeys were actually bad for the player that got them. And the secondary deck, don't worry, sides in 2 sap, 2 vanish, and a walk the plank. So,
Okay.
getting things out of the way. Yeah, good luck playing mechs, by the way. Nice Ziliax. Oh, it didn't take any damage? That's a shame. And and it does play Barista Lynchen. And the tertiary deck adds a second Togwaggle Scheme, and a Harrison Jones, and a Geppetto Joybuzz. Which, kind of interesting. So,
I mean, I guess anything it hits is fine.
Joybuzz has been seeing a lot of play across a bunch of variety of decks, and thankfully, I was really worried it was going to be like a heavy combo card. It just kind of seems like a value card that makes good use out of getting a couple cheap minions, and then using Barista Lynchen to potentially add copies of the Battle Cry 1-mana minions. Kind of interesting, more of a value card than what I assumed it would have been.
yeah, it reminds me a good bit of the Curator, or of like Countess Ashmore or something, like a body that is not an embarrassing size, but you'd never pay it without drawing a bunch of cards with it, and then you do some stuff, and it's okay. So, there have only been a few times where I have died to the combo wherein, but Luna's Pocket Galaxy assisted, aided and abetted in that 1-mana Alexstrasza, 0-mana Pyroblast turn, which I did
Oh.
die to. But, yeah, because they had a Caligos in play.
You need some freezes to take the burn off after
I could
that
do
one, jeez.
11 damage to the Caligos, and it's a 4/12, so instead I died. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have survived if they had Pyroblast and 1-mana Alex, but either way, I was not given the choice of survival. So these are, I wouldn't call them like the 100% straight up all in Pogo Hopper, but these are pretty in. Like that's fairly dependent on the bunnies to bring it home. So, really curious to see how that happens. By the way, that's going to be my interesting deck for the week, is this Pogo Hopper, and I generally trust Bunny Hopper on this subject, if I trust him on anything. But for last week's Specialist Qualifier results, you want to be playing Bomb Warrior Mid-Hunter. They remain the decks to beat, 10 wins each. Tempo Rogue was behind them at 5. Couple Murloc Shamans, and then 1 Cyclone Mage, 1 Secret Hunter, and 1 Zoo, and that was all, again, pre-buff. But that was all we saw for wins, and they line up pretty closely with popularity. It should be noted that Mid-Range Hunter was almost twice as popular as the next 2 decks, as both Tempo Rogue and Control Warrior. So, it did very well. Mid-Range Hunter did very well, despite facing a lot of mirrors and a lot of targeting. And I want to point out, Secret Hunter actually did pretty well despite a much lower rate of play. It did bring home a win, though the top 8 conversion percentage was not where it wanted it to be. It had, I believe, 4 placements in the top 8, and 3 of them were knocked out in the quarters. But low sample size and pretty decent Swiss performance. That might be something that is still worth looking into.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like people who brought it. Like, generally, you get about 5% of a good deck that gets into a top 8. Secret Hunter was 7.5, and so only like 100. I have the tier list up now. Only 121 people brought it, but 9 of those went into top 8. That's pretty good. I mean, you're looking at something like that's actually like that's one more top 8 than Cyclone Mage got, and Cyclone Mage had 3 times as many people try to bring it. So I think if Secret Hunter was being brought more, I think you probably see that top 8 representation come up. I mean, it's possible, maybe not. Secret Hunter is the kind of deck you don't prepare for, so it could have just caught some people off guard too. That's a possibility. But I mean, I took Secret Hunter to Legend last month at the very, very stroke of midnight. I got there with Secret Hunter, so I'm a believer in the deck anyway. And I think that especially when you're dealing with giant mechs that are usually on the board by themselves, Freezing Trap's pretty good, and so is Rat Trap against a lot of those decks. So it could be kind of a sleeper deck that it's worth keeping an eye on. It's still good now, even after the buffs.
And there's still yet more to explore in this meta because, again, if we land in a place where today Mutate is top 25 Legend, we have more to learn. So there's plenty to dig into. I'm sure we'll see more. There were also some highlights this week. I'm going to try and condense this section a little bit more because I think it's better if you find the time to go watch these games. I want to just give you a brief heads up about what happened. Pheno versus Boston Game 1. This is a great example of why Spirit of the Shark is not always your friend. Because in the Tempo Rogue Mirror, when one player gets a second Heist Bear and Togwaggle from Blink Fox, they're ahead. And when the other player has Spirit of the Shark down, and that Evil Miscreant gives not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Faceless Lackeys, you don't want a bunch of random 2-drops in the mirror. You especially don't want one to be Khadgar, which summons more random 2-drops from your Faceless Summoner. So, now if board space was not a thing, I believe the minion count would have been somewhere around 12 for Boston. He would have gotten 12 minions, which that would be great, but there was only room for 7. And that was not very good. So, that was not good enough as well against Togwaggle. Draw 3 cards. RDU versus Pavel. The entire series, super worth watching. RDU was on Cyclone Mage, and Pavel was on Timeout Paladin, Shirvala Paladin, Holy Wrath Paladin, whatever you want to call it. And it was incredibly tense. And there were some times where Pavel had to take some really awkward lines just to hope to see a Shirvala. Last week, Pavel had to kind of crack off the rust, and it wasn't quite as pretty as we were hoping. This week, it was a little bit better. And Game 1 was lost to a Hakar into a Ziliaxed Mechathune from the Mage. So, I don't know if there was much more he could have done there. But Game 2 and 3, Pavel was facing down high levels of pressure, and he did very, very well to deal with it and play against RDU. Super fun series to watch. Strongly recommend it. And then Tyson Camland versus Crip and Bunny Fufu at the Mech-vitational. Crip and Bunny Fufu took down the event. And the Game 2, where the Zoo, played by Crip and Bunny Fufu, was way behind against the Pogo Hopper Rogue, was really fun to watch. It was a 20-minute game. Crip actually posted on his channel. Lots of back and forth. Vanish 9-9 was beaten by a Magic Carpet turn. And there's just a lot of fun back and forth to watch here. Coming soon, we've got Grandmasters 4, like we talked about. More Masters qualifiers that are starting like basically right now. And in probably about a week and a half, we're going to start the Conquest format Coin Concede listener series. Conquest, not Specialist. Try something different. We don't need to ban Elysiana this time. She's self-banned. And we'd like to give a shout-out to the top No Elysiana Specialist series, Diego Centric, JCW490, Ikuta Pasca, Old, Botticus, BR in Milwaukee, Momo's Dad, and MTG Squirrel. Congrats to our top 8, and they will be playing out for the glory and bragging rights and a spot in the show, unless Botticus wins, in which case he gets to keep a spot in the show. And that's our tournament section. So why don't we hit up our Decksplanations, because we got something special today. All right, so the subject line of this is using data to make better choices. But the subtitle here is numbers and feelings, because sometimes feelings can be helped with numbers, and sometimes we have feelings about numbers. So our good friend WickedGood is very good at data. We don't just want to talk about the numbers. We want to talk about behaviors and feelings that we have in the ladder, and where we can use information to guide our decisions and what we do. Because there's a lot here to use kind of this external compass to guide our internal behavior and to guide what's really happening. I mean, there have been a bunch of different podcasts and streamers that have said play 10 or 15 games a day, use your tracker, and then at the end of that set, look at the data. How did you really do? Because you might remember that 1 or 2 really bad loss. But if you went 6 and 4 and you remember the 2 losses and you look back and you're like, hey, I didn't do so badly, that might help. And Steve, you wanted to bring up, I think, to start with, the benefits of the deck tracker, even when you're not looking at it, even when we're not using it during a game, on screen, off screen, the history. What have you found to be most helpful about that and the data it provides?
Yeah, so I mean, the kind of a tenet of doing any sort of analysis is that you can't fix what you can't measure, right? Like there's been a lot of books that you can read, and you've discussed the mental game of poker a lot. Annie Duke's got a book, and I forget what the name of it is, but I'll dig it up for a link. That's also very good in this regard. Annie Duke's a professional poker player who's now gone on to be like a business consultant. She talks about using poker skills to make everyday decisions and stuff like that too. And one of the things that will happen a lot when you're on ladder is you'll play a bunch of games and you'll lose like 2 or 3 in a row and you say, okay, this deck sucks, I'm getting rid of it. And it turns out that like you need 3 wins or 3 or 4 wins to counteract 1 loss emotionally. So your brain is a very bad data analysis engine because it gets emotion mixed up in this. And so what a deck tracker does, and I've talked about this on Off Curve a number of times, and I get response, well, I'm going to be playing in a LAN tournament where a deck tracker is not allowed, or I don't want an external crutch, or I'm playing on my phone, whatever. I don't want to have it up. And the thing about the deck tracker is, like, a lot of people think of like the windows that you have on the screen that are showing you what cards have been drawn. Like, you don't have to use those as long as you have the deck tracker like running in the background and collecting the game data, because what that does for you is it gives you an objective look at how you've actually been performing. Like, there's a very big difference between, say, losing 3 in a row and thinking that you're unable to win a game, and going back and looking at your last 10 games and seeing you're actually 7 and 3, but you just had a bad streak. And especially like if you're losing against control decks, those games will take much longer. So you may have won a lot more, but the time you spent losing was more than the time you spent winning. So being able to track those games and track them automatically is kind of really important, because it's very hard to, like, you can do all this stuff with like Excel or like a pad of paper next to your wherever you're playing or whatever. Like, that's better than nothing, but what'll happen is you'll forget. And so if you're not being very diligent about it, having something that's just automatically tracking all those things in the background is very helpful for you to just be able to get an objective look at how you're doing, and sometimes that'll help ground you and prevent you from switching off a deck before it's time. And one thing about iOS in particular, there isn't a way to automatically track on iOS. You can install Hearthstone Deck Tracker on PC, Mac, and on Android. On iOS, there's a couple of apps. One of them is called Trackstone, and I'm actually opening up my phone to find the name of the other one. Hearthkeeper, which add a today widget to the, like, when you swipe down and you have where all the notifications are, you can get like a little widget where you can just kind of tap a couple of things and record it, which is still manual, but it's a lot easier than having to exit an app and go write something down. But anything you can do to track your games is going to help you just be able to not rage when you lose a couple games in a row and think that you're a lot worse with the deck than you are.
Have you guys ever had the situation where you start out a day at like rank 4 and you finish the day at like the bottom of rank 2 and feel terrible about it? I've definitely had those where I got to like rank 1 and finish at rank 2, but I started the day at rank 4 and I'm just like pissed because I lost the last 5 games in a row.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time. Like that's like my life story. And it's like, especially if it's like you're losing a couple of games a long time, and then you just spend all that time losing, but it's the actual games count the same. It's like I have a really hard time with that, where I'm just like sitting in these games where I think I can win but I can't. Like those are the worst for me. And then I'll just switch to something else to prevent me from feeling that way when I really shouldn't.
Yeah, the emotional aspect of managing, especially like we have this incredible recency factor of a losing streak of even a few games, and that feeling of I just wanted to close out in a win, I'll just keep playing until I win.
Yeah.
Is a very difficult sensation to beat, and I am not going to say that I've beaten it because I haven't, and because I haven't been able to turn that off. Well, rank 4 is my home now. That's where I live. So, and sometimes it's because we're playing the wrong deck. Sometimes it's because we're not playing well. Sometimes because of things that we cannot control. So we really have to understand. Sometimes this data is telling us just stop for a second because what you were doing before isn't working anymore, and the only thing that's changed is you. So maybe chill out. But how can you tell, Steve? You actually use HS Replay and Vicious Syndicate and your own site. How can you tell what deck is the right one to play right now, whether it's in for a qualifier or in for a tournament?
Yeah, so first of all, you need to know where you're getting the list from, because, and I actually just did a whole episode of Off Curve about this. I believe it was episode 98, titled 6 Metas in Days, about how you pick a list, because you're getting a lot of lists like tweeted out, and you'll go to HS Replay and you'll see the top lists, and not all of them are going to be right for your situation. In particular, like, because there are so few people playing at top legend now, because legend ladder just means less than it used to. You get a lot more decks that are very tacked for a very small group of players. So if you're up at top 50 legend, you know that there's like 3 other people who you keep queuing into who are playing warrior. You're gonna attack against warrior. That may not help you if you're running into pogo rogue and resurrect priest and God knows what else at the ranks that you're playing at. So you need to kind of keep in mind when you're seeing a pro tweeting out a top 50 legend deck, that may not be the list that you want to play, but it's also something you can use as a starting point. I typically like to go to the decks page on HS Replay and sort it by whatever ranks I'm at, usually 5 to legend. And I limit it to top 25, minimum 25 games played, just to kind of take out a little bit of the noise, because ultimately, if you're trying to play a deck to legend, you probably should be sticking with that deck, ideally, if you're, do as I say, not as I do. but you want to be sticking with that deck. So you want to see how people, when they've gotten some reps on the deck, how they do with it. And then, you want to click through to the deck. Like, you don't want to just take the top of the list. You actually want to click through to the deck, and there's a graph on the upper right of the deck details page that shows the trend, the win rate trend over the last X number of days. You want that to be in the green, and you want that ideally to be trending up, because the minimum on the decks page is last 3 days. And 3 days ago could be an eternity. Like 3 days ago was when the bus dropped, right? As we're recording this. So something that was good 3 days ago may have been really good, and then something countered it, and now it's not good anymore. So you want to make sure that deck is trending into the green, and that, or at least it's staying steady. There's always going to be fluctuations. You want to make sure that that's like trending up, because that means that it's not like being countered by something that's common in the meta anymore. Or that people are bailing on it. But I mean, that's how I got to Legend this past month. Is I was like 11 o'clock at night on Friday, the day of the last day of the season, and I said, okay, let me just give one more try. I went to the Dex page, found that Secret Hunter list, and I went 6-1 and went straight up to Legend. So it's something that, I mean, it's not always going to work that way, but you want to make sure that you're not getting in at the end of the party. You want to be getting in at the middle of the party or the beginning of the party.
That trend line sometimes the tale of woe. Once you start seeing something, I remember on day 1 of the expansion, I was trying out all of these decks that I had seen, and they were all good against everything except Warrior. And then I was streaming for like 4 hours, and then an hour number, like at 90 minutes in, I was like, man, we're playing against a lot of Warrior. What's going on? And then I checked the end of the stream. We played against, I think, 45% Warrior or something like that. Things can move very quickly, especially right now. Right now, everyone's trying everything new, and the dawn of Earthshock is like the past 24 hours. But if you're playing Magnetic, you should expect your mechs to get silenced. So you got to diversify your threats, and it changes even how you play, not just what you're playing. Is there a way to kind of use that data in that trend line to identify, is it just me? Am I just getting bad luck or bad matchups? Or is it the sort of thing where that individual experience kind of has to be balanced with, well, logical reasoning as opposed to just finding a number that can tell you, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah, so I mean, like, again, tracking your games helps, because it helps you identify where you're losing. Like, it may be that you're losing to one matchup that's just really bad for the deck, and you're just running into a lot of it, and maybe you just need to take a break and let that pocket meta kind of pass by you. The other thing that you can do is the matchups tab, the matchup page on the meta tab is useful, or you can go into Vicious Syndicate too. They have a matchups matrix on the live tracker as well, where you can go and kind of look at the matchups where you seem to be struggling, if you can pick that out from your match history, and then compare that to what you're seeing on the matchups tab, because that should give you an idea. That's generally a large enough sample size that if everybody else is winning in this matchup and you're not, then you're playing the deck wrong, right? Like if everybody else is winning, like Warrior versus Mage, like everybody else is winning as the Warrior and you're getting destroyed by the Warrior, maybe you need to go watch some streams, or you need to go to like Meta Legend, or one of the sites that collects some of the Legend level replays or whatever, or go post a replay in the Discord and say, what am I doing wrong because everybody else is winning this matchup and I'm not. If you are just running into a bad streak, then you have to kind of figure out, okay, is this something that I need to switch off of because as the meta shifted, or should I just take a break? And usually taking a break is a better approach, because the meta tends to go in cycles, and sometimes, like, I don't really like looking at the popularity metrics on on the meta pages, just because like your sample size is just going to be a slice of that, and you could just run into a bad set of matches. Like, it's all variance, right? Like, you could just pick up the people who are playing the wacky decks that day, and that there's not really much you can do about that. It doesn't matter how many people are playing the decks you're targeting. But that's generally a case where maybe you just take a break, and then if it's still bad, then you consider switching.
That makes sense. And the taking a break thing, real important. I
Yeah.
have not mastered this. I do not know how to do this. But it is a thing that I've heard people do, and when they do it, they tend to get better results. So I strongly recommend the break, especially if, like, the feeling you get is the same feeling about when you get in an argument with someone when you click the play button. If those two feelings are the same, don't press play. Don't do it. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, I've picked up. I know, Bot, you've been playing a lot of World of Warcraft. I've gotten myself back into Diablo again, which is because I need another game that's going to take up all of my time. But it's really good as a break from ladder for me, because like I pretty much can't fail at Diablo. I can set it to a point where I will be guaranteed to succeed, and it kind of can take the edge off of that. If I've been losing a bunch, can kind of like get myself a win, even if it doesn't mean anything, and kind of reset my mind, and that's important too.
Yeah, I think that's good to have an outlet outside of competitive competitive card games, something very different, because
Yeah.
obviously, a lot of us have had the other outlet of playing something like Magic Arena, but that can tend to
Yeah.
just do the same thing. You can kind of transfer your disdain for luck and competition by kind of just transferring from one game to another. So having that outlet that is very different from everything else that you have different kind of control over, I think is very useful for your mental state.
Yeah, you don't really want to set yourself up for the feeling of I can't win in any card game, because that doesn't
Yeah.
that's not, you don't want that. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of statistics, but a little bit of a wider view, there's a lot of data out there in the world of Hearthstone, particularly in Hearthstone more so than other games because of the tracking and API and digital only and blah blah blah. So I don't want to pick on Ancient Free Play specifically, but they are the ones with the most open statistics. And it doesn't have to be just them, but which stats do you personally use to really inform your in-game decisions and general decisions? And which stats have you found might not walk you down the path that you found most effective or that other users might be swayed by when maybe they shouldn't be?
Yeah. So the thing that you need to keep in mind when you're looking at any of this data is correlation is not causation. And that's where a lot of people tend to go awry. And this is going to take us to a longtime favorite topic of mine and Hat's, which is played win rate, which you should never, ever, 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 ever use for anything ever.
Ugh.
Ever. Yeah.
Hey guys, you know that UI is
But-
good when you play it? If you know that?
But if I play it and it wins me the game, it's good, right?
Yeah.
That's why Leroy is the best card in the game.
No,
Yeah,
the best card in the game is Pyroblast. Because it is played very few times and wins almost every single game it is played.
Actually, the best card in the game is Barnes, but we won't get into that. But anyway, but
Evil!
yeah, I mean,
It's an evil card!
the you need to think about, especially with, I mean, first of all, played win rate doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's a lot of times when played win rate has absolutely nothing to do with the outcome. Like any game where you had lethal on board and your opponent takes in all 75 seconds and plays out their entire hand just to show you everything that they had and then concede, those all count towards played win rate. And the fact that they played those had nothing to do with the fact that they were going to lose the game. But now the played win rate for those cards all went down. And I mean, again, that should cancel out, but that's still going to be noise in the system. And a lot of people do that. Right. So that's just kind of like one example. But in general, like there are cards that are not intended to win you the game. They are intended to not lose you the game. We talked for about an hour and 45 minutes about Rafaam. And I mean, you can look at other cards that way too. The first time that this really came up was back in the Druid, the Spreading Plague nerf, when Gara put out a video criticizing the nerf, saying, well, this card has such a low played win rate, how is it possibly a problem? And it turns out that Spreading Plague was a card you would only play when you were losing or when you were falling behind on board, and then that would help you not lose, and that the win rate would have been considerably lower had you not had Spreading Plague. So, and there are cards that even just don't get played, but the threat of them being there is enough. Like Brawl is one that you may not even play it, but it may have an effect on your win rate anyway, just by the fact that your opponent knows that you have it in the deck. And you probably get more win rate sometimes by not playing it than by playing it, because if you play it too early, then and you take away that knowledge that it's not there anymore, then you can actually affect your win rate the other way. So there's a lot of things that can go on there. Drawn win rate is slightly better. It still has problems, just because, like, if you drew something but you never used it, does that matter? Right? Like sometimes it does. Sometimes having it there is better than something else. But really what you should be comparing it to is never like comparing it to the other things in the deck and then like looking at the lowest win rate card and then saying, well, let me pull this out. I mean, it's always a comparison. Like you can only have 30 cards in your deck, right? So like you're always comparing it to something else. And the right way to do it is probably some sort of like a Monte Carlo simulation or something like that, where you're actually like in the same situation. Do you win over X number of simulations with this card in your hand versus that card in your hand? And nobody's got time for that. Like we're not doing that, and that's not really a solution that scales. So I mean, I do like the Mulligan win rates are slightly better, but those are even problematic to some extent. I like the things that are very directly correlated. I mean, deck win rate is pretty good generally. Like this deck won this many games. That's a pretty good statistic. You can't really misinterpret that very much. I played this list of cards. I won this amount of time. There's always other variables that go into it, but you're talking about large averages, right? So that and even the matchup statistics on a large enough sample size when you're aggregating up to an archetype, those are generally pretty good. But anything that's involving cards in the individual list, you really need to be applying your own game knowledge and doing like, A/B tests more so than saying, well, this deck wins, this card wins this percent of the time in this situation.
See, I thought Monte Carlo situation, there's only the 3 doors, so it shouldn't take that long to test, right?
That's Monty Hall.
I was waiting to see if your brain would short circuit. I'm messing with you.
So gotta wake up a little earlier in the morning to get that one passed.
So okay, what stats do you use? Because there's problem with drawn win rate, played win rate, and Mulligan win rate. What's the point of collecting all these stats? What's the point? Why do we do it?
I mean, I think they can be useful in some situations. I think that a lot of these stats are good in very specific situations. Like the Mulligan keep percentage is actually pretty good because that tells you what other people are doing. Now, it doesn't tell you if they're right or not, but it tells you what generally other people are doing, and there's kind of a wisdom of crowds effect there, that if like 5% of people are keeping what's a good card, like Lava Burst in the aggro shaman Mulligan, maybe that's a card you should throw. Like, it doesn't even really matter what the win percentage is. This is kind of an accepted fact that you can kind of leverage other people's knowledge regardless of what the outcome is. I actually like Mulligan keep percentage a lot because that just kind of tells me what other people are doing, and generally, accepted knowledge of what's quote unquote correct in Hearthstone generally filters through pretty quick. So if everybody's doing something like that, it's at least worth considering. And it kind of gives you an idea of like not even the exact percentage, but just like, is this an instant keep? Is this a conditional keep? Do you never keep this? Right? Like that's really all you're trying to figure out from the Mulligan. And like, what am I looking for? Like, what are people snap keeping? Like those are the kinds of things that are useful, even more so than like the win percentage. The win percentages are interesting, but they don't really, they're not always useful as much as like, what are people doing? I like the behavioral statistics a lot, and like the deck win rates, those you can't really go wrong with those. That's an objective thing. Like the deck wins this percent of the time. You can compare that to a different deck that has a different win rate, and then you can also compare like the archetype matchup percentages are over a large enough sample size that it averages out, and those are generally pretty useful as long as the sample size is good. You also need to make sure like you're using the filters appropriately too, especially in something like HS replay. Like you want to make sure you're limiting to your ranks because the ranks can vary a lot. You want to make sure you're using the smallest time window it will give you because things change so quickly that you really want the most up-to-date data as possible. And generally you want at least 25 games played on a deck when you're looking at the Dex tab, just to filter out a lot of people. Like win rates can get artificially deflated by people who are new on a deck and then don't know how to play it, and then they say this deck sucks and they abandon it. Like knowing that how people do once they've gotten reps on a deck is actually more representative of what your potential success will be with the deck than just seeing a bunch of people like, it's like the old like Raza Priest tier 3 lol meme back in those days where, it's a tier 3 deck, but it was just winning everything. And because a lot of people were losing with it because they didn't know how to play it. And then everybody learned how to play it, and then everybody hated it. So.
Well, and also
not everybody.
I mean, Raza Priest.
Not me. I was happy as a pig and you know what, but.
And there was also the optimization of the deck as well. There was, I remember, there was a week or two where there was there were a couple like videos and articles about how Mind Blast was the worst card in the deck because it doesn't help you win against aggro. And That's true, but when the field is mostly mirror matches, or when you have a card that when you play with the rest of your cards, your opponent dies right then, there's some value to that. And people didn't really understand the value of the consistency of that and of the ability to burst damage.
Yeah.
So
I remember people cutting Barnes from Big Priest and trying that for the same reason. That like that
you
was
never
one of the
whiff
bad
on
cards in
Shadow
the deck.
Essence. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you also don't just win games on turn 4 without it. So
Like, the win rate of Barnes in the Mulligan was, I think, 25% higher than every other card in the deck.
yeah, it was
But
absurd.
but at the same time, when you miss it and you Shadow Essence, you remember that game. Because you
Right.
Shadow Essence and you Servitude, and just Barnes is the only thing that pops up. Like, well, guess I'll get back my 3-4. So, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting what you're describing. The stats that you look at are just what other people are doing.
Basically, yeah.
It's not this granular stuff of when I play this card, I win this percentage of the time. It's this is what's actually happening. Because what people are trying to do is replicate results, so you look at the results. You don't look at the statistics that theoretically lead you to the results, because the theory could be inaccurate. And the statistics could be misleading. Like you talked about, Spreading Plague was the lowest win rate card consistently in Jade Druid. And I will ask anyone that played against 5 mana Spreading Plague, how was that? How was that experience?
It was the worst.
It was
I
pretty not
hated
great.
it so much.
Yeah.
Because a card
very
that you
unhappy.
play when you're losing only is going to have a worse win rate. And a card that you play when you're way ahead, like, say, Ultimate Infestation, had a very high win rate. Because if you get to 10 mana, you're probably doing okay. And then you get to draw a bunch of cards and gain a bunch of armor and kill a thing and make a 5/5, and then you're
Or
really
8
doing
mana.
okay. It's Yeah.
2 mana Innervate. Those were the days, man.
Were they?
Wow.
Days of what? What kind of
No,
days were
well,
those?
they were definitely days of something. They
Yeah.
weren't good days.
Well, and like, I for Tempo Rogue, before the nerf, the win rate of Dread Corsair was very, very high. You know why? Because you got it off Raiding Party, and Raiding Party was a good card. It wasn't because Dread Corsair was a good card. It was good in combination with drawing 3 cards, including a weapon and 2 free pirates.
Oh
But-
wait, what? Which weapon was that?
So that's all the time we have for the show today.
Oh, that's one other thing with drawn win rate that you need to be really, really careful about is that some cards are in the deck not to be drawn, but to power other effects in the deck. And we've talked about Big Priest a number of times. Like, you pretty much would never want to draw, like, early. You don't want to be drawing something like a Yasharaj. You want that to be coming out of your deck with a Shadow Essence or a Barnes or something. So, that can affect your drawn win rate. Like, something like a Yasharaj would show up potentially with a bad drawn win rate, but it needs to be in the deck in order to make the deck work. Or any sort of like a recruit deck, like King Crush in Death Rattle Hunter, in pre-rotation Death Rattle Hunter. You probably didn't want to draw that a lot. You wanted that to be coming out of a Katharina, and so the drawn win rate would be lower, but because you're recruiting it, you weren't ever drawing it, and those are the games you're going to win. So you need to be really careful about thinking how these things interact with how the games actually play out.
Yeah, and the cards that matter might not always be the cards that get played a lot, because I'm trying to think, there was like Scargill in Murloc Shaman, I think is a great example, that when people played Scargill, it was like when you played it and it wasn't just turn 4 it dies, it's like, oh, this card is super good.
Yeah.
But that was because it enabled Underbelly Angler, and you really just wanted Angler. And then if you had that, you didn't need the Scargill. And if you didn't have that, then Scargill didn't do anything, because you played your 2 Murlocs and you're like, well, I'm done. That's all I got. So a lot of times decks will get refined, and the cards that seem really powerful end up being kind of too cute. The Rogue Death Knight reminds me of this a lot too. People were trying Miracle Rogue for a while with Valera, and it was okay. But a lot of times you just didn't want to play a 9 mana stealth that gave you armor and helped you draw cards in your tempo deck. I didn't want to do that. And I liked Valera, but eventually we all took her out of our Miracle Rogue decks, and the decks were better. So, it has been very helpful. Any last thoughts? And Botticus, any last questions?
No, it's all been very, very enlightening, very good very good information. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing all this, because I know you have a wealth of information about this stuff, and it's really helpful to kind of refocus on things that matter. And yeah, just thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as somebody who designs dashboards for a living, like, it's hard to do this stuff. It's hard to display this stuff in a way that it's not going to be used the wrong way. So, and you know, one of the trade-off that you always have is like, do I present more data, or do I present data in a more packaged way that's going to be less, you know, harder to misinterpret? And there's always kind of a trade-off there, and you kind of have like this continuum between Vicious Syndicate and HS Replay, where Vicious Syndicate is very careful about the data that they present, but you can't dig into it. And HS Replay kind of puts it all out there, but it's very easy to misinterpret it. And you just kind of need to make sure that you're understanding what you're trying to do, and make sure that the data is actually showing you make sure that you understand what the data is actually showing you, and not what you want it to show you, because that's where you're going to end up going astray.
That is as good a way as any to end this Decksplanations, and, well, we do have one more question, Steve.
Whoa,
Nope, that's not. That's the wrong soundbite. One more question.
That's not really a question.
How long can this go on?
You're the most heavy metal thing that I've ever seen? He asked, questioning. We have many folks we'd like to thank. Check out our thanks section on the website at Concede.com, where you can find our contact info, show notes, and Patreon information. You can support our show at patreon.com/CoinConcede. Join us every week live by following us on Twitch at twitch.tv/CoinConcede podcast. Join our community chats on our Discord at discord.coinconcede.com. Write into our email at coinconcede@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at CoinConcede. Like, share, and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/CoinConcede. If you'd like some CC swag, head over to our shop at shop.coinconcede.com. Big thanks to our producers, Viriatus, Donald, Pug Ugly, and Doge TK. Botticus, tell us about your coin concedes this week. Tell us about the bot army, whatever we're called. What are we called?
I don't know. I got Botticru or
Yes.
something. I don't know. I gotta figure it out. But basically, this is gonna be a WoW related coin concede, but there's been a person that has helped me a ton with my streaming, and she's a ton of fun to hang out with. And honestly, if you're just into good entertainment, I highly suggest checking out this person's channel. Her Twitch channel is twitch.tv/donebunny, and she streams mostly World of Warcraft. I usually like stream along with her. We do dungeon carries, but honestly, just a really funny person, great personality, and I think worth at least checking out. So make sure to check her out. She's done a wonder for helping me with my stream. I had a crazy stream yesterday where I did squats for subs, and that was extremely painful, but also very worth it, and probably going to continue to do that in the future. So yeah, just really can't thank her enough for all of her help with that kind of stuff.
What about you, Steve? Who would you like to coin concede to?
I want to concede to my new BFF Zentimo for getting me a lot of disgusting leaks today. I want to concede to my brother from another mother, Andrew, welcomed his second child into the world this past week, and somehow is still tryharding on ladder through all of this. And I'm having to remind him on a fairly regular basis to calm down and keep your expectations reasonable, because you're literally not sleeping, and that's not really good for focusing on high level Hearthstone. But you know, I'm really happy for him, and it sounds like his family's doing great. So I'm and I'm happy that he timed this in between card reviews, so that, you know, he'll be hopefully well rested enough by the time we have to talk for 6 hours.
Oh boy, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Maybe you'll have another kid by the time you're done with the card review. And if any listeners would like to find you or your content, where would be a good place to do that?
Well, offcurve.com is kind of the best place to go for everything. That's where you'll find the podcast. That's where you'll find the dashboards for the specialist meta, which is at offcurve.com/specialist-meta. I also have links to my Twitch and my Discord, but you can also just go to twitch.offcurve.com or Discord.offcurve.com. Discord, community there's a lot of cross pollination with the Concede Discord, so you'll probably find a number of people who you already know if you go over there. And I usually stream Sunday evenings around 8:30 or 9 o'clock Eastern time. Kind of my cap off to the weekend, start off the work week pretty good, playing whatever is good. We got a nice little community in there. It's fun. I enjoy it. I wish I could do it more, but I also have trouble being awake enough to make well-reasoned and defensible plays after a full day of work. So I'm only doing that on the weekends after I've had time to recover, but I really do enjoy that a lot. And you can also find me on Twitter at WickedGood. I tweet often and about things both related to Hearthstone and also Switch games, and also occasional social issues things as they come across. So you get a nice little variety there.
There's a lot of Twitter volume there. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I would like to concede to our good friend Rod Johnson, who is becoming one of the newest experts on the Tempo Storm Wild Meta Snapshot. So props to him for making his name over a Tier 5 Wild After Dark. I think is the new tagline of their show. I might have come up with it. I don't remember. And yeah, it's wonderful for him to be part of that very special crew. And that's our show. So keep calm and focus on what matters. And if you see us on the ladder, concede.
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 Take cold comfort in your victory. You win. I can rest now. You win. For now. No, your victory proves nothing.
The day is yours.
I choose death. You have triumphed. This time, this hunt is yours.